Charlotte, on average, people drive about 40% more than people drive in the New York City region, for example, just to set one example. So there are big disparities in terms of how much people drive on average. And that has to do with how our communities are designed and what kind of transportation systems we build. So, to go through these quickly on vehicles, and this is, I vowed last time I gave a speech here to the American Association of University Women, I think I caused everyone's eyes to bleed with the number of statistics I threw out via PowerPoint presentation. So I vowed this time I would not do that, and I would talk mostly conceptually about what we do. But I do want to throw some numbers out there, because this is the most exciting part of my job right now, that sort of I cling to when I look at how many challenges we face elsewhere. In 1975, Congress enacted an energy policy to deal with the Arab oil embargoes, and it included, for the first time, a new regulation, corporate average fuel economy standards, and a new administration within the Department of Transportation was tasked with enforcing this. And the efficiency of our car and truck fleet leaped from the 70s to the 80s. And then gas prices dropped, and the Reagan administration eased the standards, and they didn't increase in the 80s, they didn't increase in the 90s, and they didn't increase in the 2000s, until in 2007, when Congress passed the Energy Independence and Security Act, again, to address perceived problems about oil, and real problems with oil, and required that the administration increase the standard, the average standard for all light-duty vehicles to 35 miles per gallon by 2020. So it had to be at least that. That was the floor. In 2008, the Supreme Court, in a case that we actually helped to litigate, told the EPA, if you determine that greenhouse gas emissions are a danger to public health and welfare, you can regulate them. Under the new Obama administration, EPA quickly made that determination and then moved forward with the Department of Transportation to create joint standards for the vehicle fleet, perform new vehicle efficiency standards, basically. In 2009, the administration said, well, you know what, we're going to do 35.5 miles per gallon by 2016. So they said, we're not going to do the floor. We're going to go above the floor by half a mile per gallon and do it 4 years sooner. You know, which was, that was, after, let me tell you, after 3 decades of this policy standing still, that was an unbelievable watershed. And then lo and behold, this year, they did one better. They put in place a standard of 54.5 miles per gallon on average by 2025. So, and to be clear, these are new vehicles. This is the standard for new vehicles. It takes 12 or, you know, vehicles are longer lasting every year, so it's probably closer to 15 years now for the fleet to turn over. So the on-road standard will lag behind this substantially, but still, this is a big leap. 54.5 miles per gallon on average for new vehicles by 2025 is a huge leap. And to give you an idea of that, that's projected to save each consumer on average $8,000 over the life of a vehicle. So that's all fuel costs. That's how much you pay in fuel otherwise if the standard were in place. Or $1.7 trillion in aggregate at gas pumps nationwide, money that can circulate in the economy for other purposes. It'll cut carbon pollution equal to 85 million fewer cars on the road, slash oil imports by 1/3, and create 570,000 jobs as the auto industry tools up. And component manufacturers, and people don't realize how big the auto industry is. It's not just about the automakers themselves. There are components that go into the automobiles. There's a whole supply chain with a ripple effect of benefits as these technology forcing standards come into place. So this is a big deal, as the Vice President might say. It's a big effing deal, and it's something the administration should be talking about. It's the biggest step that's been taken on energy independence or cutting global warming pollution ever by anyone in this country. It's huge, and it puzzles me that they're not talking about it. I have a friend, Dan Becker, who was at the Sierra Club when I was there in the late 90s, and he made us all sick of hearing one soundbite. This is the single biggest step that we can take to cut global warming pollution. The single biggest step, and he kept repeating that over and over and over. It's, damn, go to rest. But he was right. And the administration didn't just take a step, they took a leap. So, and they should be taking credit for that. So that's the very good news. Fuels is a real challenge. And if you know what's happening with the Keystone XL pipeline, I don't know if people are familiar with this. This is not something I work on a whole lot, but I do know that, and I've written about this in the past, our fuel mix, even as our vehicles get cleaner, our fuel mix is getting dirtier. It's going through what, you know, this is a generous way of putting it, what I call a carbon drift. It's becoming more carbon intensive as we run out of conventional sources of oil specifically and go to unconventional sources of oil, which require more energy to extract. So everybody remembers the Deepwater Horizon. We're out there for a reason. There aren't a lot of fields that are left out there that can yield the amount of oil we need to continue feeding, especially our economy, but increasingly other economies. So you have the deep water. You have shale right now that is actually being exploited in North Dakota. Then you have the tar sands in Canada, which are very diffusely spread deposits of bitumen, which is this gooey stuff that can be refined into oil only through very energy-intensive processes. They use a lot of natural gas to power the process to create this oil out of this really icky substance that's buried in the sands up there. And they also use a lot of water in the processing. So it's extremely resource intensive. And so unfortunately, even as our vehicles get cleaner, you go back to the source of the fuel that's increasingly going to the tanks of those vehicles, and you have a problem. And of course, as we electrify the vehicle fleet, which we're confident is likely to be the case in the coming decades, we also need to clean up the grid. So electric vehicles provide different benefits depending on where you plug them in, of course. If you plug them in California, Washington, or Oregon, you have hydro as a weak power source, and you have low carbon intensity of the grid there, so you get a big benefit. If you do it in Ohio, a lot more coal, so you get a smaller benefit. So we have some problems in terms of the sourcing of fuels, even as the vehicles get cleaner. And then the last one is the one that, the leg of the stool that I actually focus on most. I would focus on transportation policy and travel activity. So efficiency of travel on our roads and highways and in our transit systems, as well as how much we drive. We focus, as you can tell, I'm a good Trinitarian when I give speeches, we focus on 3 levels of government. So we focus on regions. Regions are key. Metropolitan regions specifically. Metropolitan regions are where the majority of traffic is generated. It's where the majority of economic activity takes place in the U.S. It's where the majority of people live and work. And that trend is increasing. There are more and more people moving to metro areas. So getting the planning right and the transportation system right for our metropolitan areas is crucial. Hardwiring them to provide different transportation choices is really important. And then states is also where we focus. States are the main implementers of federal transportation policies. So they take federal money and decide how it's spent. And then they also take their own money. So every time you pull up to the pump, you pay state and federal gas taxes. All of that goes into programs, transportation programs. And then the State Department of Transportation decides how to invest that money. And we are trying to influence the federal rules for investing that money and trying to work with states to reform the way they've done those investments in the past, because state highway agencies traditionally have been very highly focused and only recently have they become, and by recently I mean the past few decades, state transportation agencies. So, and it's, change is slow with some of these bureaucracies. So, but it's happening. It's happening. In California is where the most interesting work is happening. If you have a chance, Google SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments. It is a metropolitan planning organization for Southern California, which is Los Angeles, basically. Some would say the cradle of sprawl. And yet, they have just adopted a sustainable community strategy and lined up a dramatic expansion of the public transportation system over the next decade that it'll change LA dramatically. I mean, it's pretty amazing what's happening in Los Angeles. And that's led by policymakers and political leaders. Mayor Villaraigosa, for example, of Los Angeles, has done tremendous work, especially lining up this plan for this expansion of the public transportation system. So, I mean, he pushed hard for federal support for that. I remember testifying in front of Congress on this transportation bill, and to give you an idea of how much I testified and yet how little influence it has. I testified 5 times about this last transportation bill, twice in front of the House Committee on Transportation and 3 times in front of the Environmental Works Committee. So my wife at some point said, you should just take your speech from last time and go in there and just say to them, you heard what I said last time. Just do that. Just repeat what I said. But Mayor Villaraigosa testified at one of those hearings, and he had flown across the country just to testify and talk with Senator Boxer and cajole her into making sure that an expansion of the key part of the transportation program was put in place. And then he flew back to Los Angeles. And he was on the phone with her every week. And in the end, this kind of thing pays off because he was first in line when the transportation bill passed, asking for funding from a new program that provides financing for transportation expansions. He got more than $500 million from the Department of Transportation just last week as part of their first round of grant making under green law. So it's a huge, huge thing that's going on in LA. So we work with regions, we work with states, and then we work with the federal government. And working out of our DC office, as you might imagine, means I spend a lot of time doing that. And sometimes it's breathtakingly wonderful, as with the vehicle standards, and sometimes it is, crash your head against the wall, frustrating, as with the new federal transportation law, which is a lackluster 2-year bill with status quo funding levels, and actually has some anti-environmental provisions in there that I wish I had gotten in there. So that's the that's what I work on, and that's what I hope. Those are the kind of things that I hope you all will be interested in as well. Virginia is a key state. People look at what happens in Virginia in terms of what the state government does and what happens locally in terms of examples of exemplary development in transportation. And you're right next to the seat of power in terms of the federal government. So, and this is really continuing and building on the progress we made with vehicle efficiency. Is going to take a lot of work. The good news is we're directionally, we're headed there for the first time in decades, if not ever. If you look at the Department of Energy's projections of oil consumption in this country, they're curving downward, which is bizarre and wonderful. So building on that, though, is going to take a lot of people at the oars now that we have the direction right. And I hope you all will be willing to do that. And look forward to being there with you. Nice.